Thanks. And thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation to attend and to speak. I haven't been back since I graduated from Northwestern, so it's been really great to be back. I've seen this building many times, never been inside, so this is really amazing. So as Daniel mentioned, I'm kind of talking about the 2D version of his talk. I hope he didn't steal all my thunder. Um, so I'll just kind of show like a simulation or kind of like a video of basically what the problem is, although it's not hard to imagine. So I'm working on a square domain 1 by 1, so area of the domain is 1. I have either periodic or reflecting boundary conditions. Doesn't really matter. I have one small target or multiple small targets. Again, doesn't matter as long as they're small. As Daniel mentioned, I'm taking the size of the target to be epsilon, right? And here I'm showing two searchers, one Brownian, one Levy flight. And the question is, well, like, which one's faster? Which one do you expect to find the target faster? Okay. So I made this slide in response to something that was a remark that was made yesterday. A lot of times, you see a problem, you're like, well, I'm gonna replace diffusion by some kind of anomalous diffusion, and let's see what happens. And a lot of times it creates a lot of work, but then at the end, you don't really get something qualitatively different, right? You see, maybe a different prefactor, a different scaling, but really no new phenomenon. And I'm part of this talk is going to be guilty of that as well. But toward the end, I'm going to show something that I think is genuinely new, that is unique to Levy flights, and that cannot happen for Brownian motion. So I'm hoping to answer this at least not in the resounding no. So maybe I don't need the slide so much. I'll just kind of emphasize that the convention that I use is that the power law is the length to the -1 + 2 alpha. So I have alpha between 0 and 1. Alpha being 1 is the Brownian limit. Okay. And the stopping condition. So what counts as a target being found? So this does not, right? With a Levy flight, you can take a long jump. You can fly over the target. This does not count as a target being found. It has to be something like this. And for that, this is why you have to impose, you have to impose u equals 0, not just on the boundary of the target, but in the interior as well, right? So it's u equals 0 on the entire disk. Okay. I will mention something about the no flyover condition, and it turns out it's quite different, right? So the statistics end up being quite different. Periodic boundary conditions. So if you take a leap that takes you out of the domain, with periodic boundary conditions, you come back on the other side. With reflective, you kind of bounce off at the same angle of incidence. Okay. So I'll just give like the kind of leading order result in 2D, right? So I'm going to let u epsilon of x be the expected search time for a Levy flight starting from location x. I'm going to let u bar epsilon be the average over all starting locations, right? So here this is the leading order result. It's independent of everything else, in particular spatial distribution of the targets, right? Here, omega is the area of the search domain. Chi alpha is like an order 1 constant that encodes essentially the geometry of the target, whether it's a disk, whether it's a rectangle, oval, whatever, right? Notice that it enters the leading order term here. Epsilon is kind of like a linear size of the target, taking that to be small, and is the number of targets. And you see right away that the Levy flight search is expected to take significantly longer, right, than the Brownian search, which is log epsilon in time, or log epsilon in the size of the target. And I'm going to try to give a little bit of intuition. I think this remark came up yesterday as well. Like, why does this happen for super diffusion? I'm going to try to give my best interpretation of this. So this scaling here, this epsilon to the 2 alpha minus 2, if you do the analysis, you'll find that this scaling is determined completely by a local analysis near the target. So I'm not going to show the analysis, but it's a local analysis near the target that gets you the scaling. And so that tells you, well, like maybe I need to ask about what happens to the searchers that start near the target, right? So what happens to those searchers? Well, they can take long jumps, right? And with this flyover condition where flyovers are allowed, a long jump when you're near the target kind of takes you way out, but a long jump from way out there doesn't necessarily take you close to the target, right? So if you're close to the target, you take a long jump, you essentially have to restart your search from a far distance away. And you can kind of see this from a solution actually of u of x. So here, again, u of x is the expected search time starting from location x. It's obviously 0 when you're starting exactly on the target, which here is in the middle, and then it kind of increases as you start farther and farther away from the target. This is kind of like a cross section of the solution with Levy and Brownian, and you can see with again here it's u equals 0 at the target. You can see like if with the Levy, right, I move my starting position a little bit away from the target, and it increases very quickly, right? Because it's kind of taking some of the average from out here, because you jump out, you're very likely to jump outside. Whereas with Brownian, the increase is much slower. Okay, so I think that this is what's happening with Levy flights, and again, this is with flyover, right? When flyover is not allowed, you'll see something very different. So I showed you the leading order result. What does it not distinguish? Well, for example, it doesn't tell you that if I have two targets, and I want to minimize search time, it's better to space them out more evenly rather than have them clumped together in the corner. Similarly with reflective boundary conditions, it's if I want to minimize search time and I want to place a target somewhere, it's better to obviously place it in the center than it is to have it somewhere in the corner. Okay. Okay. So here's the order one correction term that takes into account target locations, right? So suppose that we have two targets, and that's leading order term is still there, and the order one correction term is this stuff here. So it's essentially a sum of all the entries in that matrix. So what is this G? What is this R? Well, it's the Green's function that Daniel alluded to. It satisfies this equation here. I'll talk about what the generator A alpha is. I'll derive that in a second. The integral equation ensures uniqueness because A alpha has a null space of constants, right? And the local behavior of this Green's function near its singularity, it has this power law kind of blow up, right? Algebraic blow up. And in fact, that's kind of what tells you what the scaling is actually just right there. And then the regular part is that constant term there. Okay.
Excuse me, do you want to use a pointer that works?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thanks.
It's a middle button.
Yeah, this is actually much better. Thank you. Okay.
Good luck.
I just got to remember which one's which. Yeah. Okay. So if you look, I'm not going to go into the details of how I compute the Green's function. It's happy to talk about that later. But if you do it, then you can kind of match the numerics quite well, right? So here I have a target that I'm going to fix at 0.25, 0.25, and I'm going to vary the location of the other one and compute the first passage time, right? And it's located at SS. I'm going to vary S. And you can see that when S goes to 3/4, this guy's a local optimum, right?
Is this reflective?
Periodic. It's periodic. Yeah. I think reflecting is actually the same. This is actually reflective because obviously if you don't have reflective, everything's the same, right? If it's periodic. So this guy here, I'm moving this essentially along the diagonal for different S. And you can see obviously at the center, it's a local minimum. In fact, it's a global optimum there. Okay. So, obviously it says here Levy flight is much worse. So what is it actually better for? Well, it's less prone to shielding effects. And what do I mean by that? So suppose that you have a desirable target that's being shielded by 5 undesirable ones, and you're asking, well, what is the probability of finding the desirable one before hitting one of the undesirable ones, right? And I'm plotting this against alpha. So alpha equals 1 is the Brownian limit. And you can see that as alpha gets smaller, it essentially gets to 1 over 6, right? So it's essentially just there's no shielding effect, essentially, right? Whereas with the alpha equals 1, shielding effect is quite strong. Okay. Okay. I'm going to derive that operator, that generator A alpha. Forgive me if I mean, I'm going to start with the Brownian case, and this comes from Redner's approach of conditioning on the first step. So I have, I'm sure you've all seen this before. Essentially, you can go to one of the nearest neighbors with probability 1 over 4. You do the expansion for small h, divide by small delta t, blah blah blah. You do your thing, and then you get this Poisson's equation with u equals 0 on the boundary, right? And the idea is the same for Levy flights, except every point is a neighbor, right? You can get from any point to any other point. You just have to, with some diminishing probability that diminishes with the distance, right? So the way it goes here. So you just have to figure out basically every possible path from x to y, right? So I can get there in directly with this probability here. Okay, and this comes from Voldenocci, so he uses this this probability. I'm essentially counting in units of h, and that unit of h, the number of units of h, obeys a power law. Okay, so I can do this. I can do this, right? If I have periodic boundary conditions, I can wrap around. So essentially, I'm flying to the next cell, the 0, 1 cell, or I can fly to one of the other cells, right? So this is an obvious picture, and with these corresponding probabilities. Again, it's power law in the units of h. Okay. With reflective boundary conditions, same thing. And so here it is, right? So this is conditioning on the first step. This is the first passage time starting from location x is a weighted sum, right, of the first passage time starting from location y, summed over all y. And this is the probability of getting from x to y summed over all possible paths. Okay, and if you compare this is exactly analogous. Okay, I'm going to divide by delta t. I'm going to rewrite it slightly. In particular, I'm going to split this h to the 2 plus 1 times alpha, or sorry, 2 times 1 plus alpha into this thing. And the reason is pretty obvious, right? Because I want to take, as I take the continuum limit, I want to take h to go to 0, delta t go to 0. I want to keep this guy constant, right, finite, and this h squared is going to be kind of like the dx dy in the Riemann sum, right? So I do that limit, and I get this operator here, right? And again, I have u equals 0 on the entire target, not just on the boundary. Okay, so it's like an exterior problem. And here's the generator, right? So it's essentially the fractional Laplacian on the torus. Okay. And I think I make that point here, yeah. So if I have a periodic boundary condition, or sorry, periodic function on this flat torus, and I do its periodic extension up onto all of R2, applying this A alpha to the U on this torus is the same as applying the true fractional Laplacian over all of R2 to this periodic extension, right? And of course, this guy has Fourier symbol k to the 2 alpha. All right. Yeah. So this is the fractional Laplacian. Free space Green's function is given by this. Again, this basically tells you what the scaling in epsilon ought to be. Yeah. Okay. So I promised I would talk about the no flyover problem. This is not my work, by the way, but if you recall, our formulation allows you to fly over the target without that being counted as being caught, right? So I want to refer to this paper by Chris Danksman and Daniel Hahn, who are my colleagues at UNSW. Boris is their grad student, their PhD student. And what do? So they construct one Levy flight step as a compounded random walk. So what does that mean? one Levy flight they take to be k nearest neighbor Markovian jumps. Okay? And k here is a random variable that's distributed according to a Shibuya distribution. I must say this is the first time I've heard of that. I don't think the actual distribution is that important. It's this behavior that's important for large K. Okay? And so what do? You draw K from this distribution, whatever it is. You execute those K steps, but if one of those steps before the Kth step hits the boundary of the target, then no other steps afterward count. Okay? And they claim, so I don't claim to understand all of this, but they claim that this process is modeled by the spectral fractional Laplacian. So what do I mean by that? I've written it here in kind of poor notation, but essentially, if you want to compute this guy here on the right-hand side, what you would do is you would decompose P, right, in terms of the eigenfunctions of the pure Laplacian, of the regular Laplacian, with phi equals 0 on the target boundary. So you're already taking the boundary into account, right? This is not an exterior problem anymore. This is, regular Laplacian problem, boundary value problem, right? Reflective on the boundary of the search domain. And so eigenvalues, so these guys are positive, right? If you want to compute this guy, all you're doing is you're doing these actions on the eigenfunctions. Okay? This is quite different from the generator that I derived before, where I need an exterior condition. So they're completely different. So here's that picture. This is search domain, right? This is the target. You have phi equals 0 on the target, reflective on the search boundary. And there's this well-known result that for the fundamental eigenvalue, I guess here it's the largest lambda, right? So lambda here they're all positive, right? Lambda here scales as 1 over log epsilon, right? And you can see this as epsilon goes to 0, lambda not the fundamental eigenvalue should go to 0, right? So that's fine. It's also known that the average first passage time is proportional to 1 over lambda naught, 1 over the fundamental eigenvalue. And so for 2D Brownian motion, of course, you get the log epsilon. What I derived earlier with flyover allowed, that was this algebraic blow up in epsilon. But if you take if you do what they do, no flyovers allowed, and you take the spectral interpretation of Laplacian, and of course then you get this, right? It's actually much smaller than Brownian motion. So it turns out, if what they say is true, and I have no reason to doubt them, the flyover actually makes a huge difference in terms of what's happening. Okay. So I told you, I kind of promised you something that was qualitatively different for Levy flights. I hope I haven't oversold it, but here we go. I have Levy flights on a sphere, on a spherical surface. Okay. Major assumption is I assume that they go along geodesics. I guess on a sphere that's not so surprising, but on a regular bumpy surface, I'm not sure of applications where animals just exclusively follow geodesics. But in any case, here's the sphere. I have a small target centered at the North Pole. Okay. So this is an absorbing target, small, and I think about one particular point on the sphere, and I look at all the ways that it can jump straight into the target centered at the North Pole, right? So these are all the possible trajectories that take you, through at least through the North Pole, and obviously you have to jump the right distance. So essentially, you jump as long as you jump, you pick your jump to have angle between this angle theta, then you're fine as long as you jump the right distance. In jump space, it kind of looks like this, right? You have the angle, and then as long as you jump the right distance, you're fine. So this is like you going directly there. This is like you wrapping around once. There's another band where you'd wrap around twice. This is going the other direction, and then other direction wrapping around once, and so on and so forth, right? So you have these bands, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's one arbitrary location on the sphere, right? So I'm sure you know what I'm going to do next. What if you're sitting exactly at the South Pole? Well, every geodesic goes through the North Pole, doesn't it? Right? And so that picture changes significantly. And the picture now looks like this, right? I can jump in any angle that I want as long as I jump in the right distance. In particular, I guess it would be like pi minus epsilon, pi plus epsilon, right? I get this band, I wrap around once, I get that band, and so on and so forth. And it turns out that this effect is strong enough that the difference between this picture and the previous picture that I showed for some other point is strong enough that you end up feeling, the South Pole ends up feeling the North Pole more strongly than you might think, given that it's the farthest location from the North Pole. And what impact does this have on the first passage time? Well, so let's see. The way that I set it up, it's independent of this angle theta, right? It only counts the distance, only the distance from the North Pole matters. So I'm going to plot u of phi, right? So u of phi, I'm going to plot the profile of u along this curve, right? So obviously it's going to be 0 here, and I assume it's going to increase, blah, 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 right? So let's see what it looks like. I have u equals 0 there, so that's the target. Increases quite quickly. In fact, it's power law increase, same as before. But at the South Pole, you get a little local minimum, right? You certainly don't see this with Brownian motion. So what does it look like? I'm going to zoom in because it's a little bit dinky, but it is a local minimum. And yeah, so this is certainly something that we don't see with Brownian motion, and it's due solely to the fact that you have these geodesics that kind of collide at the North Pole, right? And this only matters if you're taking long jumps. With Brownian short jumps, this has no effect, right? I'm going to switch gears just a little bit to pattern formation, and you say, well, like, who cares? I'll tie it back in a second, okay? So I have this Schnackenberg reaction diffusion system on the spherical surface with Levy flights, and this guy is the generator for Levy flights on that spherical surface. I'm not going to write it out, but you can kind of imagine what it's doing. Now, for epsilon very small, okay, alpha equals 1. This guy, I'm going to change it to Laplace Beltrami on the sphere, right? Just regular reaction diffusion system. Michael's done a lot of work in this, right? You admits localized spot solutions. They look like this. So I stole this from the paper. So this is a plot of the V component, the activator component. It's order 1 here. So this is the one spot solution. It's order 1 in the red, and then exponentially small everywhere else where there's blue. So what's happening here is the spot has an instability. It's splitting into 2. And once it splits into 2 spots, these spots repel each other. Okay, so the interaction is repulsive. They drift away from each other. Okay, until an equilibrium is reached, and of course they'd be antipodal, right? That's an equilibrium position. Now, what happens here for Levy flights on a sphere? I should mention this is only a plot. This is not real numerics. This is kind of like prototypical numerics. We've done the calculations, though. We're sure this is going to happen, right? I have a spot at the North Pole, right? Very small everywhere except order 1 near the North Pole, at the North Pole, or around the North Pole. This is the spot profile along the phi angle. I have a bump here. I have a small bump here, okay? And that's a direct consequence of, again, the geodesics thing that I was talking about earlier. Now, imagine what happens, right? So yeah, I should mention that a single spot is now always accompanied by an antipodal bump, right? They come in pairs. They don't, right? They come together. Now, suppose this one splits into 2, and the 2 spots start repelling each other, right? They drift away from each other, and as the 2 spots approach the antipodal configuration, the other spot will kind of be repelled by the bump, the antipodal bump from the other spot, right? And I suspect what's going to happen then is that the equilibrium configuration may not be antipodal anymore. It'll just be a little bit off because of the repulsion from the antipodal bump. And well, how does this connect back to first passage times? if you've done these problems before, you'll know for this particular system, equilibrium spot configurations, they directly correspond to optimal target configurations that minimize MFPT. It's not hard to see. It sounds weird, but it's not hard to see. So an optimal two-target configuration then under Levy flights, you might not put them antipodal anymore. You might put them a little bit off, right? And I think in general, this is going to happen on any kind of surface where you have these geodesics that collide, where the optimal configuration for a Levy flight search is it could be different from that of the Brownian. Okay. I think I'll stop there. But thanks very much for listening.
Questions? I have a question. So early on in your talk, you were saying that maybe a benefit of Levy flights that's overlooked is there's this like shielding that
Yeah, it's less prone to shielding effects.
Shielding effects, right? But then when we think about this like sphere, North Pole, South Pole business, if you don't have the flyovers, but now you're seeing where you're going, now on those plots, you're sort of like filling in, instead of having rings, you're just filling in that whole.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So what happened then?
I haven't thought about I haven't admittedly I haven't thought about that. But the no flyover is completely different. Statistically, I think it's quite different from the flyover case. I guess it would be quite prone to shielding effects, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Antipodal case, you're like sort of after radius pi or angle.
That's right. It would fill in. It would fill in. Yeah.
You're filling in like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And I think that makes sense. I mean, it's faster search. The no flyover case is faster than the Brownian, and so I would expect that the shielding effect to kind of flip also. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
So I'm a little surprised about 90s, and it's kind of maybe just to educate those of us who haven't really followed this field, right? It was this big hoopla about Levy flights, right? As an optimal way to search, right? And that was pretty controversial and kind of fell apart, I think, in part, right, over the years. So what is the current thinking on that? Is that just a dead avenue?
I think it's been kind of, I don't want to say disproved, but
yeah.
I think there's, as you mentioned, the best I can put it is I think there's some controversy around it, and I'm not too convinced, even with Levy flights in general, to be honest. I don't know, but I think that hypothesis. I'll just say it's controversial. I think.
Still, so
yeah,
it's still
for sure. I think it's become more and more controversial.
This maybe it's related to Samantha's question, but for on the sphere, you start at the South Pole, the target to the North Pole. You have this local minimum that's starting at the South Pole.
Yeah.
If there's no leapovers, if it's the Daniel Hahn version, do you still have a local minimum?
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so anymore. Yeah. I think that ends up being more similar to Brownian motion, just because all I'm doing is I'm taking different eigenvalues, right? But
I see.
I think it's going to be quite similar. Yeah.
Sense for this, for clarification, the shielding effect and the difference between the Levy and the Brownian shielding effects. What's the role of flyover there? Like, it's strong.
Right, because you can fly over the.
So you need flyover to get that.
I think so.
So without flyover, what's the story?
Without, again, I haven't done it. That was. I haven't done it, but I would imagine that it's stronger than Brownian.
Stronger shielding than Brownian without flyover.
I believe so. That's my guess, but I haven't done the problem.
You do like a Dewey reaction model, like interpolate between the two. But...
Yeah. I'll admit I have not analyzed it. I haven't thought about it too much. All I did was I mentioned that result to them, that it should be log epsilon to the alpha. They say they're not surprised. They haven't done the simulations yet, but I guess the proof would be in the pudding there to see what happens.
Okay, let's thank Justin again.